Joint Security Area is a film that came out in the year 2000 that's written and directed by Park Chan-wook. So, Joint Security Area is actually a $50 Patreon request from Tyree. This one I was particularly excited about because Park Chan-wook is a filmmaker that I always get excited about. And at this point, I feel like I'm pretty familiar with his work. I've seen Old Boy, I've seen Lady Vengeance, I've seen The Handmaiden, which to me is an absolute masterpiece and is my personal favorite Park Chan-wook film. I've seen his most recent film, Decision to Leave, and I've seen his short film that was included in an Asian horror anthology called Three Extremes. And I just feel like, again, at this point, I just know, I have familiarized myself with his style of filmmaking. And he's just an exciting filmmaker to watch. He just has this really fun, energetic, and maximal style of filmmaking. And I don't mean maximal to solely reflect the content that he has in his film, even though with films like Old Boy and The Handmaiden, he definitely includes tons of boundary-pushing content. But it's also reflective in just his presentation. Like when it comes to transitions, when it comes to just editing, it's all very flashy, but not in a bad way. It's just, again, really overly stylized in a way that I think a lot of people have a lot of fun with. And when it comes to my feelings about Joint Security Area, I gotta say, I think that this film is pretty damn good, maybe even great. But I'm not gonna lie, it took me around a half an hour, maybe even more, to actually feel invested and immersed into the material. And that's for a few reasons, but most notably, at least the one that felt like affected my experience the most in the beginning, had to do with more of a production value type of complaint. Because the first scenes that we get are actually in the English language. And at first I thought I rented like a dubbed version of it or something because the ADR was just really bad. Like it was really noticeable and it felt like video game dialogue, not only just within the audio quality, but just within the interactions and the way that characters were presented and delivering their lines. It felt really just not genuine. It just felt like I was just watching a movie and I'm watching actors act. And it came off as a surprise. And I understand that this is one of, Park Chan-wook's earliest works. But it just threw me off guard and I had trouble getting into it. And, even beyond that production value choice, whatever you want to call it, I also feel like I just wasn't that interested in the setup to begin with. Because this film is essentially, I don't want to say it's two different films, but there's two different focuses and it kind of splits into a different type of structure because the setup establishes our one of the main characters, which is a female character that is the neutral investigator of the crime that occurred. And her character, like overall, in terms of like a strong female role, I think it in that regard is actually really good. But in terms of like the backstory of her character and in terms of me caring about her character and her character traits, that's where like it was difficult for me to get into it because it's just not, I just feel like it's not all that compelling and interesting. And that's why it kind of took me a little bit to get invested in this film because once this film actually starts focusing on, the Joint Security Area conflict between the North Guards and the South Guards, that is when this film really picks up and really becomes interesting and engaging. And once that starts being explored and, once we start understanding the relationships and the conflict that arises, it just clicks on every single phase. What this film is going for is starting to finally come to fruition and just make so much sense. And it just becomes an amazing film. The backstory that this film showcases that progresses into the relationship between these guards and thereon after the dynamic that they share with each other is just so humanly compelling and politically thought-provoking. And I say that because obviously this film is presenting two different sides of political stances and identities, the North Koreans and the South Koreans, and obviously they share completely different political ideologies and beliefs. And once these characters start clashing and when these characters start connecting, it, again, like, politically speaking, I think there's so much to think about. And again, just on a human level, there's so much to think about in regards to how every human being, no matter which walk of life you come from, we all crave attention. We all crave companionship, and loneliness is something that the vast majority of human beings fear the most. And I feel like, politically speaking, even beyond all of that, it's very telling in the sense that it kind of showcases very petty ways in which countries can break out into war. And I mean, I can only imagine the dumbass reasons why innocent people ended up being killed in countless wars across the globe throughout human history. And it just seems like this film does a great job at exposing the fact that wars can break out for really silly and unfair reasons that are actually not all that politically motivated. And this one's on the contrary. It's actually the decision to put political beliefs and ideology aside for a second that is actually what caused this horrible conflict. Because on the surface, it really does seem like their relationship is harmless, and in nature, it really is harmless, but it's the constructs around them that have been built that have caused all of these conceptual boundaries that unfortunately results in tragic conflict. The structure of all this is a bit interesting too, because in the first act of this film, we get depictions of the actual crime that occurred, but the depictions are based off of assumptions and speculations of what our character currently has. So we're getting skewed versions of what actually occurred, and then as the film progresses, things become less blurry, and we finally get revealed in the third act, how everything actually went down, and which characters were actually responsible for what, and, which characters should be held responsible for the consequences of their actions. And it's a really interesting build-up when it comes to that kind of revelation. But again, it is that structure of this film that kind of goes back and forth between the past and the present. And again, a lot of the present stuff, pretty much all the present stuff, follows our female main character. And again, she is the neutral point that is investigating exactly what went down. And again, unfortunately, it's just that her character is not nearly as interesting as the conflict and the characters that occur in the joint security area. And not only that, but throughout the film, we get these little moments where she is yet again speaking in English with her superior officer who also speaks English. And there's just something so odd about the dubbing and the English language delivery between both characters that just feels so off and just feels, again, just so ungenuine. But luckily, even with her character in the mix, when she's speaking to the people that were involved in this crime, obviously the joint security area guards, those interactions were great. And, seeing just how she investigates this whole thing and how she's probing them and, doing her best to uncover the truth, that's when, like, her character, becomes more immersive, becomes more engaging, becomes more interesting. And, even though this film does go back and forth, it does have a pretty good pace to it. Like, it doesn't linger too much in a certain area. And the only time that it does actually have a huge segment, in the past, it's all fantastic because it's all taking place in that joint security area where the most compelling elements of the film are taking place. But a really neat fact is that in South Korea, when this film had its theatrical release, it was actually a box office hit. And I'm glad that it was, because this film didn't have the lowest budget, and, there's actually a lot of money and effort poured into recreating the joint security area. Because when it comes to the North Korean side as well, they had to go off, they're obviously not going to be granted clearance just to go over to North Korea and observe everything and get everything just right. So, they had to eyeball a lot of the stuff, go off of pictures, go off of, experiences to make sure that it's reconstructed in exactly the way that it would, not just in appearance, but also like an actual landscape and how, some of the guards are moving around within this landscape. And the performances across the board, I think, are fantastic. Even from, again, I know I've kind of bagged on the main female lead in this film, but I mean, her performance is great in this film, regardless of the shitty English ADR. But obviously, I got to give a shout out to the man, the myth, the legend, Song Kang-ho. He's in this film, and he absolutely fucking kills it. He probably has the most demanding job in this film. Besides Lee, God damn, what the fuck was his name? Lee Byung-hun in this film, who is the guy that plays the South Korean border character that has the most screen time. He had a really difficult role as well. I mean, I think he probably has to deliver the most internalized and intense emotional struggle, perhaps compared to anybody else. He just has, again, the most of the screen time in this film, at least that's what I remember. And especially within the tragic crime that happens and just the amount of intense pressure that is radiating from that scene, he definitely has to deliver it. And it is really, I could tell, like, it's such a difficult scene to portray because of the amount of sheer emotional intensity that is required to pull it off. And he just really killed everybody. Again, everybody really kills it in this film. Not a really easy film to act out, and I think everybody did an excellent job. But one last little nitpicky thing before I give my rating is that, as I mentioned, Park Chan-wook has that maximal type of style to his films, and that is a bit apparent here. It's not as, flashy as other films like The Handmaiden or Oldboy or anything, but there are moments of that style that are very apparent, and there was one choice that I just don't know it really worked for me. And there's this one scene where somebody jumps out of a window and there's glass everywhere and they're falling, from like a 5-story building. And it was shot like with this weird special effects, slow motion, twist, turn, zoom out thing of the camera. And again, it might work for some people, but for me, it's just one of those maximal style moments where I'm just like, I don't know. It is something that's definitely going to be up to taste, but I just felt like that moment could have been, I would have felt more of the emotion and the gravity of the scene if perhaps it was shot, in not such a over the top kind of way. It's definitely ambitious, and I always got to give it to him that he's always trying new ways to present things in this really energetic and creative way. But for me, it's not always going to land. And that was just one of the few moments in the film that didn't quite land for me in terms of how it was captured. Also, I want to say the actual ending shot of this film is fantastic. I really, really loved the way that this film chose to end. Just really compelling and makes you reflect on everything that you just witnessed. Again, it's one of those things to where it shows something in the past that you don't get full clarity of, but at the very end, it shows you the full picture. And I just think it just really resonated with me, and I thought it was a really creative and impactful way to conclude everything that we witnessed. But regardless, I still obviously very much enjoyed this film. There are so many qualitative things about this film that would make me recommend it highly to a lot of people. And obviously, I recommend it to everybody watching this video. So I'm going to give Joint Security Area a solid to strong 7 out of 10. Yeah, despite my issues with it, clearly I think it offers so much value, and I think this is a film that everybody should at least experience once. But anyways, that's all I got to say about Joint Security Area. If you really enjoyed what I had to say about the film, please give it a thumbs up and share it amongst your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to be updated on more film-related content.